It is time for the Writer's Block, our weekly look at sports, and this week it's all football. I'm Jenny Carlson here in the studios of the Oklahoman, joined by Cedric Golden in the studios of the Austin American-Statesman. Hello, dear friend.
What's up, Jay Carr?
It's November. I guess I should figure we're going to talk football, but it's wall to wall. We're going to start with the college football playoff. The rankings are out again. The initial rankings, Cedric, I felt like the Big 12 was in pretty good shape. A team like Oklahoma State with 3 losses gets into the top 25, and you think, hey, this might work out for the Big 12. But now we see Baylor slipping 13th. They're the lowest undefeated team in the rankings. It seems like the Big 12 is really kind of teetering on either in trouble or completely, sort of on the outskirts of the conversation. Obviously, a lot still to play out, but this feels like the Big 12 is in a bit of trouble here.
Well, to steal a line from the old 50s song, it's not the Big 12's party, and they can't cry if they want to. Big 12's not going to be involved in this mix, Jen. I can tell you that now. They just aren't going to be involved. OU losing to K-State closed the deal on that. The Big 12 champion will play in a nice bowl game, but it won't be a CFP game, Jen.
Yeah, and it just feels like, analysts looking at this, you just see a lot of hurdles between any Big 12 teams getting in. Obviously, there's going to be some teams that are going to beat each other between, say, Oklahoma and those top 4 spots, Baylor in those top 4 spots. But at this point, Cedric, if you think about it, Oklahoma, Baylor, probably the marquee matchup of the weekend. ESPN Game Day going to be there. So clearly a game that, a lot of people feel like is worth watching. But, if Baylor wins, they've beaten the top 10 team, but now they've beaten a team with 2 losses. Oklahoma not undefeated. If Oklahoma wins, they've beaten a top 15 team, but not a top 10 team. It feels like, even as these Big 12 teams are beating each other, you're just not having the bump like you're seeing with SEC teams or Big 10 teams beating each other. Just not the respect there to bump these teams up into a spot where they need to be to get into the playoff.
And if you think about it, Jen, if Oklahoma were to lose to Baylor on Saturday and then lose to them again in Jerry World, if Baylor runs the table, that's an interesting concept. But their weak schedule at the beginning of the season will probably bite them in the butt. I don't know that Baylor's going to run the table. I don't think they're going to beat OU in Waco. So I just believe that the Big 12, OU losing to K-State killed the Big 12. Texas not being very good didn't help OU's cause. No. If OU beats K-State and Texas is a 1 or 2 loss team instead of a 3 loss team, maybe OU's up there in 4th or 5th, tied with Georgia and Bama. But here's what I know. LSU just conquered their biggest hurdle. They whooped Alabama like they stole something. So LSU's going to get in. Ohio State is the best team in college football, in my opinion, the most complete team. And Chase Young will be back, the defensive end, who's on a suspension. Clemson has a very weak schedule. The ACC is crap this year. So Clemson's going to get in. Then you got that 4th spot. You got 9-0 Minnesota. You got Bama. You got Oregon. You got Utah. That 4th spot, I hate to say it, is if that goes to Alabama, I'm just going to have to call for an investigation. I don't want Alabama in there this year. I'm sorry. And Georgia lost to South Carolina, which lost to App State. So come on. Yeah. So Georgia has no business in that thing either.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out. Pretty clearly to me, the committee is, yes, losses are, a black mark against you. But to me, it's pretty clearly who you've beat. Have you beat enough quality opponents? Have you beat top 10 teams? Have you beaten top 20 teams? Those are really the questions that the committee is leaning heavily on. And, Cedric, you mentioned it. Baylor having a bad non-conference run. And truthfully, when you look at these conferences, yes, there's some teams within the Big 12 hurting each other. But the thing that keeps biting the Big 12 is, A, either, lackluster schedules in the non-conference, or B, not beating those marquee teams in your non-conference. I mean, you mentioned Texas, Cedric, and I don't want to put it all on Texas, but it looked vastly different if Texas had beat LSU. There's some other teams that had some opportunities to win marquee non-conference games and didn't. Right now, the Big 12's really their best non-conference win is K-State over Mississippi State, and Mississippi State is nowhere in the conversation in the SEC. The Big 12 has to beat those non-conference marquee teams when they get the chance, and they just haven't done it. Not this year, and really not over the last few years.
No, they haven't. OU carries that banner, and we remember when Texas beat Notre Dame here in Austin, and I think it was Joe Tessitore said Texas was back, and they were back to the tune of 5-7. So we didn't know that Notre Dame was horrible back then. So they've won a couple of marquee games. OU always plays a good non-conference schedule and holds its own in those games. But the Big 12, Texas was its big chance. Texas knocks off LSU in week 2. Then we're talking, Jen.
Yeah.
And maybe Texas is more confident. Maybe that gives them the confidence to go in and win in Dallas, but it didn't. What you see is a 6-3 team that's nowhere near the rankings, and teams like OU are suffering as a result. Yep. A win over Texas is not a big deal this year in the Big 12.
Yeah, I mean, it's been entertaining, or at least for me, Cedric, to watch as, these different Big 12 teams have beat each other, and, to see Baylor emerge. It's only been 2 years since they won one game in Matt Rule's first season in Waco. So their turnaround has been dramatic. There's been so many close games. There's been overtime games. We saw the nail biter between Oklahoma and Iowa State. I mean, we've been entertained by the Big 12, but at the same time, it hasn't helped their playoff hopes in the least. So I think that this latest ranking really bodes poorly for the Big 12. Even if you do have a Baylor win out or an Oklahoma win out, I just don't see how it's going to happen. It feels very, very hard, the road between where they are now and one of those top 4 spots. All right, let's move on. I said football. Segment 2, we aren't straying from the pigskin, but we're talking about Collin Kaepernick. And Cedric, the sort of cast-off, he has been cast-off quarterback, led the charge, if you will, with the protests, the silent protests during the national anthem. Then essentially blackballed from the NFL, was out of football for the last 3 years, but he is doing a private workout this weekend for NFL teams. NFL, the league has set this up. Is this a legit shot for him to get back in? Is this a PR stunt? What do you see in this whole setup with Collin Kaepernick?
I think it's a legit shot for him to get in, and I think it's a PR stunt too. And I think if he throws well, which I expect him to, this is not going to be about Collin Kaepernick's physical ability, Jen. They're going to have Collin Kaepernick in a room with the lights and the big white lights going over, like in a train station, like an interrogation. They want to see what's inside Collin's head. They go, Collin, you're going to still be kneeling and putting the pigs on your socks and supporting Fidel Castro and ripping in this people like that. And to me, Collin Kaepernick will be viewed a lot more friendlier in 20 years than he is now. Yeah. He laid down his career for a concept. Black men were getting shot by cops, unarmed black men shot by cops, and he stood up for it, and it cost him his livelihood. Yeah. Just like it cost Muhammad Ali his livelihood when he refused induction into the Vietnam War. So what happens now is Kaepernick, who hasn't made a peep about it, hasn't complained. He knew the cost, and he took the whatever the penalty was going to be for his beliefs. I applaud him for that. Now, what we're talking about on Saturday, Jen, is Collin Kaepernick, who hasn't played since the end of the 2016 season, is going to get a chance to show people that he can still play. He threw 72 touchdowns and only 30 interceptions in his NFL career and led the 49ers to the Super Bowl in 2012. Holds the record for most rushing yards in a playoff game by a quarterback, 181 yards. So what I think is happening, Jen, on the field is, first of all, there are some bad quarterbacks in the league. Mitch Trubisky. There's a guy named Ryan Finley that's starting this week. Fitzmagic is on his 8th team. So though there are some really bad quarterbacks. And what we've seen are guys like LaMar Jackson, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, those RPO type quarterbacks are doing work. And meanwhile, you got one of the OGs of that type of play just sitting in his living room and working out every day. I think Colin Kaepernick's going to get a job.
Yeah, don't steal our thunder on segment 3. We're going to talk about some of those RPO masters out there in our third segment. A little tease on that, but yeah, I think this is we talked. I think it was maybe a week ago that there had been nearly 50 quarterbacks to start this year in the NFL. Some of the most high-profile quarterbacks in the league. You can start with Roethlisberger, Breeze, on down the list of guys that have seen, injuries that have forced them to the bench for a while. So the NFL, and then in some situations you've seen backups to the starter, they're hurt, and then they're on down the list to the third guy, to maybe going in and acquiring somebody. There are teams in a world of hurt for good quarterback play. But that has been the case. There have been times in the last couple years where that's been the case. And Colin Kaepernick, you would think, would have been a better option than some of the guys that were thrown out there. But he did not get the chance. So I do think it is. There is a segment of PR, of a stunt here by the NFL. But at the same time, if that gives Colin Kaepernick a chance to show he can play, to get back in the league. And, Cedric, the truth is there are some teams out there that, they've got GMs, coaches, coordinators, whatever the case is, who are sitting on extremely hot seats. They need to win games. And I know that the brouhaha around Colin Kaepernick, there'll be some of that if a team does pick him up. But if he goes out and starts winning games for a coach or a GM that might lose their job, don't you think there's going to be somebody that would take a chance on this guy? Because there are some teams that have not played real well this year.
Oh, wow. There are some teams that would love to have somebody like Cap. How about the Cincinnati Bengals? They're bad.
Yeah.
Not to throw shade at your boy from Oklahoma State, but Mason Rudolph hasn't set the world on fire in Pittsburgh.
Right.
He's had his ups and downs. That defense is carrying the Steelers. So there really are. Jacksonville, you never know if Nick Foles is gonna make it through a game or not. There are so many teams that could really use a guy like Kaepernick if he still has it, Jen.
Yeah.
3 years away is a long time. But like I said before, if Muhammad Ali can come back at 3 years later and fight Joe Frazier, I think that Colin Kaepernick can come back 3 years later and play NFL football. His skill set translates to today's game, and I think that if he got in the right situation, that he would be a really good asset for a team. If not as a starter, even as a backup. Could you imagine him backing up? How about the Redskins? They're horrible.
Yeah.
Could you imagine them backing up young Haskins?
Yeah.
Or even or backing up Drew Brees?
Sure.
Once Teddy Bridgewater signs with a new team. There's a place in the league for Cap.
I think the big question for me, Cedric, is if a team does pull the trigger and sign Colin Kaepernick, what will the fan reaction be? We saw the Nike campaign, I guess, a year or so ago, definitely caused some ruffled feathers. There were some people that said goodbye to Nike. But, Cedric, there were also a lot of fans that said, thank you for standing up with this guy. Thank you for being a voice for him and letting him, be out there and be a voice for change in some really serious issues in our country. I guess we don't know what the fan reaction is going to be. It'll be divided for sure, but that's going to be interesting too, because what you said at the start is dead on, Cedric. The fact that a lot of these teams are going to want to know about the non-football stuff with Colin Kaepernick too. That's as much an issue. What is the fan reaction going to be? Is there any way to possibly know what it might be if a team picks him up?
Oh, I can tell you in a lot of circles, they're going to be angry because they're such great Americans, Jen. They don't want him desecrating what that flag represents. The military, there's some military guys that took it the wrong way, and some of these people that are complaining the most are the same people that won't even take their hat off.
Yeah.
while the national anthem is playing.
Hmm.
I look around, Jen, and I see him. I saw some last night at the Texas basketball game.
Yeah.
Some of these same people are the same ones. Do you think that when they're sitting in their lazy boy on Sunday afternoon, getting ready to watch the NFL and the national anthem plays, do you really think they jump up out of their seats, or do they chug another natural light and wait on the commercial to come on? So I don't like the fake patriotism of it all. There are some people that are legitimately PO'd that he knelt during the national anthem. But can I speak to you as a black man in America, Jen?
Sure.
He represented some of my beliefs. Jen, if you get pulled over by the cops, the first thing you're thinking is, oh, man, I hope I don't get a ticket. The first thing I'm thinking is, man, I hope I get a ticket and live to tell about it.
Yeah.
That's what happens to me if I'm in a city where I'm not comfortable and someone doesn't know me. In Austin, I've been pulled over and the cops go, "Oh, you're Cedric Golden. Yeah, slow down next time." But in Houston or Dallas or Chicago, I mean, I'm just another brother driving a nice car. So to me, I think he stood up for something he believed in. I will always be appreciative of that because I didn't have a voice, in a national voice on that issue. And at the time that he did it, Jen, it was really bad for black men in America. It's not much better today, but it has died down a little bit, knock on wood.
Well, and I think he raised that. Realization of what you're just talking about. I think a lot of people in this country were unaware of those fears that a lot of fellow Americans live with when it comes to just getting pulled over, those sorts of things. So, yeah, I think the awareness that he raised the issue is not fixed. I'm not going to sit here and say that, and I know you're not, Cedric, but I do think awareness is higher now than it was ever before, and so for that, I think we can all thank Collin Kaepernick. I know those will be conversations that are being had in the NFL, and who knows, maybe it continues to raise awareness as we continue to talk about him in the coming days and weeks. All right, segment 3, we're staying with the NFL, but now we're going back on the field, and we're going to talk about the MVP race. Cedric, we had an unbelievable Monday night game. Seattle Seahawks, Russell Wilson, 49ers. I mean, it was a great game. Russell Wilson stepping out, showing himself as a legit, maybe the leading MVP candidate. But how can you forget what LaMar Jackson is doing? Are those the two guys leading the charge? Is anybody else even close to the two of those guys?
I think those are the two, and if you want to give Dalvin Cook a little bit of love, he's been really good for the Vikings. But I'm gonna go Russell Wilson by a hair over LaMar Jackson. Russell Wilson, 23 touchdown passes, only 2 interceptions, and he absolutely willed that win at San Francisco. And he's one of those guys who does more with less. We thought that he would probably take a step back, and the Seahawks as a team would take a step back. The Legion of Boom is no more, and he lost his favorite receiver, Doug Baldwin, to retirement. But what he's ended up doing is have the best year of his career, completing almost 70% of his passes, 2,700 yards passing. He's getting rushing yards. He's doing whatever the Seahawks need him to do to get wins. I think he's a phenomenal talent. He doesn't have a Pro Bowl receiver. DK Metcalf's a good young wideout, but he's not on the level of an Amari Cooper or a Julio Jones just yet. But he's getting it done, and the Seahawks are a dark horse contender to get to a Super Bowl. I don't really like their defense, but the only reason that we're even talking about the Seahawks, Jen, is Russell Wilson.
Yeah, he's been spectacular. And, you know, in the same vein, I mean, I think that you can say a lot of very similar things about LaMar Jackson. He hasn't had quite the stats. I mean, I think Russell Wilson's a little over 2,700 yards, only 2 interceptions this year. I mean, just some unbelievable numbers. But Lamar over 2,000, 20-plus touchdowns, 5 interceptions. So nothing to sneeze at there. And you know, I think LaMar Jackson kind of has he may not be the best in this regard, but his wizardry, just the almost must-see TV aspect of the way he plays and the spin moves, and you know, they beat the Patriots, a great, always great Patriots defense. So to see him come through some of the teams that they've been able to beat, and he continues to evolve. Remember when that guy was, people said he needs to change positions. He's a wide receiver.
Bill Polian, who was the architect of those great Bills teams that went to the Super Bowl, and the Indianapolis Colts team that won a Super Bowl. He said they should move him to a receiver. And about 2 weeks ago, he apologized for saying that at the draft, because guess what? LaMar Jackson is a big-time quarterback. And hats off to John Harbaugh for finding Lamar's happy place, getting him to where he's most effective. Did you see them last week, Jen, line up LaMar Jackson, RG3, and Mark Ingram in the backfield at the same time? The first time ever 3 Heisman Trophy winners lined up in an NFL backfield. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. A guy that I do think right now you're probably looking at Wilson and Jackson as the 2 front runners, but Deshaun Watson, it's going to be interesting to see what the Houston Texans do the rest of the year. He has really taken, I think he's been great the last few years, but he's really taken a big step forward this year. Again, unbelievable stats, 2,400 yards. Again, only 5 interceptions ago with 20-plus touchdowns. So, I do think that he's a guy that bears keeping an eye on. You want to keep both eyes on those first 2 guys in this MVP race. But don't forget Deshaun Watson. And Cedric, what you said last segment when we were talking about Collin Kaepernick, as you talk about these RPO, the run-pass option quarterbacks, all 3 of these guys, just spectacular in that regard. Are we seeing? I don't think the NFL is going away from if the next Drew Brees or the next Tom Brady is out there, they're not turning away. But it sure seems like the NFL is way more comfortable with quarterbacks who have a different skill set than the statuesque, pocket passer that we've seen for so many years. Seems like the NFL is okay with guys that have a different skill set, and if it is a different skill set, it may take him to unexpected heights, great heights even. It seems like a fairly significant change in the NFL.
Oh, it is. And if you're Vince Young, you're sitting there going, man, if I just come along 10 years later.
Yeah.
Because everybody's playing like VY used to play. And even RG3, who's a backup in Baltimore. Those guys, the RPO game is hot. It's the sexy thing now. They like guys that can get rid of the ball, that can be accurate and in short distances, occasional shots deep. And I think it's the new wave. But I will say this: there's still some very talented pocket type passers like a Patrick Mahomes,
sure,
who I think is this generation's Dan Marino, or even somebody like Baker Mayfield. So I think Baker is going to figure it out eventually. Mm-hmm. But Baker would prefer to be in the pocket, but he can get out and scramble as well. These old cats, the Phillip Rivers, the Big Bens, the Tom Bradys, Drew Brees, the guys of that ilk, they're on the way out, Jen. They can't play forever. Aaron Rodgers is 36 years old. They can't play forever. And when those guys are gone in the next 2 to 3 seasons, what you're going to see is like 90% of the NFL quarterbacks are going to be RPO guys. Sam Darnold's not an RPO guy. Daniel Jones is not an RPO guy. But I'm telling you, it's the wave of the future. Dwayne Haskins not an RPO guy. But most of these young quarterbacks coming into the game, they want a guy who can move and make things happen.
You say they aren't going to play forever. I'm not sure Tom Brady agrees with you. I think he's...
No, I know. I want to play to 45. Man, will you go home to your hot wife and let somebody else quarterback the Patriots? Good Lord.
He's not ready to do it yet. Not happening yet, but we'll see. Fun stuff. Great talk this week. We'll have lots more next week. Who knows? We may even talk about something other than football. But
doubtful.
Don't count on it. We'll see you next week. Hope you come join us again.